Hello and welcome to Learning Thursdays. Learning Thursdays are offered to addiction professionals as a free learning opportunity with the goal of improving the knowledge and skills of the New York State substance use disorder workforce as we strive to improve the lives of individuals in prevention, treatment, and recovery services. Today's Learning Thursday is Risk Management Series. This is part 1 and this is the hiring process. Joining us today will be Robert Kent. I am Trisha Allen. We will also have Tom Keene and Heather Manikis, all staff of the New York State OASAS Counsel's office. If you have any questions, please send questions to learningthurs@oasas.ny.gov. Again, it's learningthurs @oasas.ny.gov. The goals of today's presentation are pretty simple. We are hoping to provide you with some basic understandings of the Justice Center process as well as the importance of the Justice Center process in the context of overall hiring practices, to provide a general hiring best practices guidelines, and then discuss items such as checking the sex offender registry and trying to find out additional information if there is any on Justice Center involvement. And then finally, we hope to provide you with a working knowledge of the criminal history review and analysis process. This is done through our CBC unit. So this would include when staff may be hired and what is required of both providers and job applicants. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Kent.
Hello, I'm Rob Kent, the General Counsel at OASAS. We thank you for joining us today. We felt it was really important to do, I call it an update. For some folks it might be new information, hopefully not too many, but we felt it was important to make a presentation to you guys with a number of my staff to talk about the Justice Center, the hiring process, and the criminal background check or CBC process. All these things they're less new than they had been, but there's some updates, but also some important guides that we wanted to provide to you. I think these are all really critical parts of running a good, safe program, and we wanted to put in front of you things you need to be thinking about as you're running an OASAS certified program. So we thank you for joining us. We hope you find this as informative. If you have questions, there will be an email address that you can send them to at the end of this presentation. Thanks.
Hello again, and welcome to the Hiring Process Justice Center Review. My name again is Trisha Allen. So just a really quick review of the New York State Justice Center, also known as the Justice Center for the Protection of People with Special Needs. This is a state agency that has jurisdiction over OPWDD, OMH, OASAS, OCFS, DOH, and SED, and these are programs that are licensed, certified, operated by those specific state agencies. So the Justice Center accepts reports of significant incidents and or allegations of abuse and neglect, and in cases where there is an alleged instance of abuse and neglect, the Justice Center will investigate them. This is relevant for OASAS specifically. The Justice Center is the entity that does conduct the investigations for abuse and neglect, though that may be different for other state agencies where that authority has been delegated to them. So really quickly, a rundown of the types of incidences of abuse and neglect that the Justice Center would investigate. That would include physical abuse, so a staff member or a custodian, which would be anybody in the program who works for the program or is contracted by the program that has regular contact with the service recipients or patients in our program. So abuse and neglect would be where a custodian has some sort of hits the service recipient. Psychological abuse would be if there was some sort of taunting or name calling. Sexual abuse includes any type of inappropriate touching, sexual contact, sexual assault. And then there are categories of neglect as well. So this would be circumstances where the custodian or the program had some sort of duty that they failed to follow through on. And that would include if they were supposed to provide some sort of supervision or medical care and they failed to do that. Another category is the deliberate misuse of restraint or seclusion. So this would be a circumstance where potentially you would place a service recipient in a section away from everybody else, perhaps as a punishment. And then there's also a category where using or administering controlled substances in a way that's contrary to law, that would be a form of abuse or neglect. Aversive conditioning, this could be some sort of physical stimulus that you would use to modify somebody's behavior, provided it wasn't really specific. There was no legal authorization to do so. That's not something that really happens in our program a lot, but it does exist. And then finally, there is obstruction, which is interfering with the discovery, reporting, or investigation of abuse or neglect, or falsifying any records, that type of thing. So this is really quickly a discussion of the process of an allegation when it comes into the Justice Center. I'll cover circumstances where where OASAS does the investigation as well. That is for circumstances where it's a significant incident. But in this case, an allegation is made. It goes in either through the web form or phone. The Justice Center will classify that, and depending on the classification, if it's an abuse neglect, it will be investigated by the Justice Center, and then if it's a significant incident, it gets investigated by OASAS or their designee. If it is an abuse neglect, it's either criminal or non-criminal. The investigation would proceed, at which point, at the end of it, the Justice Center would make some sort of determination, either substantiated or unsubstantiated. And if there is a substantiation, if it's against a custodian, it would be classified as either Category 1, Category 2, or Category 3. So Category 1, that's the most severe. That's the one that would place the subject of that finding on the staff exclusion list, which I'll cover really briefly here, actually. Where they're placed on the staff exclusion list, that actually means that they're no longer permitted to work with populations in the state agencies that are overseen by the Justice Center. So that would include OASAS, OMH, OPWDD, OCFS, SED. These are usually the most serious allegations that are substantiated, so physical abuse, sexual abuse, or other really severe conduct. There are also circumstances where individuals who are found to have committed some sort of Category 2 or mid-level offense, or have been found substantiated for an allegation for a Category 2 offense, may be placed on the staff exclusion list, or it would be elevated to a Category 1. And that would be in circumstances where they have two Category 2 findings, separate Category 2 findings, within 3 years of each other. So if you have one Category 2 finding, and then within 3 years of that finding, a separate Category 2 finding is made, and then the person would be placed on the staff exclusion list, and that would kind of elevate it to a Category 2 or a Category 1. I will also note that the staff exclusion list is a permanent placement. The last category is a Category 3. This is last serious incidents of abuse and neglect. So these are not egregious or really severe conduct by the subject of the allegation. And I would also note that these are sealed after 5 years. Okay, so I already spoke about this a little bit, but the staff exclusion list, this is when somebody who has a Category 1 or 2 Category 2s, which essentially works out to become a Category 1, within 3 years, they are placed on a list, and it prevents them from being hired by any agency or provider that works with vulnerable populations. Again, OASAS is one of those. Okay, so significant incidents, these are the lower category. These are incidents that would be investigated by OASAS. They're not retained by the Justice Center for investigation. These are incidents that they do or they could reasonably, foreseeably result in harm to health, safety, or welfare of a person receiving services. A lot of times what we're looking at is instances where the service recipients, maybe there's a fist fight, or it's conduct by service recipients that if it were done by a custodian would qualify as abuse neglect, but because it's between two service recipients, it's instead a significant incident. So, you know, a lot of what we see is service recipients fighting, service recipients name calling, you know, that kind of thing. Another situation that would give rise to a significant incident allegation would be conduct by the custodian that's inconsistent with the treatment plan. and or some sort of medication error that's got some sort of adverse impact. Other instances where it would be a significant incident, that includes a crime, a missing client, although I will say it's got to be a client who has not made it known to the provider that they're leaving. So if a client says to you, I'm leaving, I'm done, I'm out of here, I don't want to be in treatment anymore, you kind of know they're leaving. Or if they say, I'm going to my girlfriend's house, I don't want to be here anymore, or I'm going to my parents' house, that's not technically missing because they've given you some idea of where they're going and they've told you that they're leaving. Confidentiality violations is another form of a significant incident. A suicide attempt is also a significant incident, though I would note merely having a suicidal ideation is insufficient. It would have to actually be a suicide attempt. And then body cavity searches are absolutely always reportable to the Justice Center, which would then classify it and give that to us. So this is just the OASAS process for a significant incident. First, the incident is reported and it's classified by the Justice Center. It's then turned over to OASAS. OASAS does a notification to the appropriate field office, and then that field office person, along with the provider, or the field office person would do an investigation and request information from the provider. The field office and or the provider, depending on if there's an ability to have the provider make a determination, they would make a determination, and the provider would provide CAP or corrective action plan documentation to the field office, which is then, once sufficient, the case is closed. So what happens when an incident happens in your program? Report to the Justice Center. When in doubt, always report. I would rather have you report too much than not report enough. If there is some impropriety or failure on the part of a staff member, especially if they're licensed or credentialed, I highly encourage you to report to the licensing or credentialing agency as appropriate, depending on what license or credential they hold. This is extremely important when we're talking about the hiring process, because where somebody has committed misconduct, yes, you as a program may take a corrective actions, including some sort of employment action against the individual, but that may be insufficient, and that's why we speak so much about reporting to the licensing or the credentialing agency. So one new item that I did want to let you know about is the administrative action reporting mechanism. So this is a web application. Every provider should have heard about it, and if you haven't, I highly encourage you to follow the link. Any agency that is under Justice Center oversight has to report when any administrative action is taken for all subjects of substantiated abuse and neglect. So where you get the letter from the Justice Center that says this allegation has been found to be substantiated against this particular individual, you need to use the ARM system, AARM system, and go and document what actions you've taken. Every provider must have an ARM authorized person. It's very similar to the CBC, where you have to have an authorized person. And you'll receive an ARM notification email that includes the ARM reference number. So when you go into the ARM system and upload this information, just make sure you print the confirmation page so you have that to refer back to. Okay. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tom Keene. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Keene from the Counsel's office at OASAS, and I'm going to talk about the hiring process and some considerations that you should take into account before getting to the criminal background check. So the first thing that you're going to want to do before making a job offer, if you're dealing with a credentialed or licensed person, so for example a CASAC or medical staff or licensed mental health counselor, is to confirm that in fact the credential that they claim to have is valid. Obviously you don't want to hire someone who's being hired for a position that requires a credential and then find out that the person doesn't actually have the credential that you thought they had. So to do that, with OASAS credentials like CASACs, you can find out the status of the credential on the OASAS website. And for professional licenses issued by the State Education Department, like medical personnel and mental health counselors, social workers. You can find out whether they are holding a valid credential by going to the State Ed Office of Professions website. We'd encourage you, if it turns out that someone is falsely representing themselves to be licensed or credentialed, to report that to the relevant agency, either OASAS or the Office of Professions. You also want to check the sex offender registry to make sure that the applicant is not on the registry, or at least if the applicant is, that you're aware of that and the applicant has some explanation for the situation. There are two different ways that you need to pursue to check the status of the applicant on the sex offender registry. The less serious sex offender category is level 1. That requires a telephone call to the Division of Criminal Justice Services. The number's on the PowerPoint. And if it's a more serious category 2 or 3, that you check by going to the Division of Criminal Justice Services website. And as I said, it's not necessarily a complete bar, but you want to know if the person is on the registry and why, and ask for further information from the applicant. Obviously, you know, there's an issue in the field that people are aware of concerns about inappropriate sexual behavior by staff with service recipients, and so you want to be aware and protect your patients or service recipients against any kind of exploitation of that kind. In addition to this, these prior considerations, also before making a job offer, you probably should have the applicant answer some questions about their history in terms of professional discipline and justice center incidents. So again, if it's a licensed or credentialed person, you should ask whether there's ever been a determination that by a licensing organization or government agency that they engaged in any kind of misconduct or unprofessional behavior. Similarly, you can ask specifically if OASAS has reprimanded or suspended someone's credential. And to catch everything, you probably want to ask if there's anything pending currently against the person's credential, whether that's with OASAS or the Office of Professions or any other licensing or licensing agency or organization. You can also ask if a person has ever surrendered a license or certificate to an agency. And then we can get to the Justice Center questions, which would apply to everyone, not just licensed or credentialed people. You could ask if the Justice Center has substantiated allegations of abuse or neglect against the applicant, or notified the applicant that the applicant is currently the subject of an abuse or neglect investigation. Again, none of these questions would necessarily disqualify someone if the answer was yes, but you'd want to see what the applicant has to say to explain the situation. And you want to ask these questions to protect your organization, protect your patients, and also it gives you the opportunity, if it turns out that you later discover someone's been untruthful in their application, to terminate their employment if that seems to be the proper course of action. Also, before making the offer, I'd encourage checking references, and not just to check references in terms of references identified by the applicant, but also to contact former employers, whether they're listed as references or not, to verify, did the person leave that former employer voluntarily? What were the circumstances of the person's departure? Is that consistent with what the applicant told you in the hiring process? And you may also be able to determine whether the applicant has been truthful with you about whether there's any history of credentialing or licensing complaints or Justice Center incidents by asking former employers. So that is a source of valuable information that you would want to collect before making a job offer. Then you move into the process of what happens after you make the job offer. You've already heard reference to the staff exclusion list, which you're required to check in order to determine whether the person can be hired, and the statewide central register, which is a register of indicated cases of child abuse. Those will be covered in more detail in the next section, as will the criminal background check process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather Manicus.
Hello, my name is Heather Manicus with OASAS Counsel's office. My main responsibilities within Counsel's office is working on the criminal background check unit. So today I'm going to talk about minimizing risk along with the criminal background check process. The criminal background check process is 3 parts. I want to clear up that it's not just fingerprinting. It is a process of 3 parts that must be completed. So your first really objective after you've made the job offer is to ensure that all 3 parts of the criminal background check process are completed. Tom touched upon a couple of these, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. The first step would be checking the staff exclusion list. You've already heard a little bit about that list. It's a very important first step, because if you find that your prospective hire is on this list, you will not proceed with the hiring. So if you find that they're on there, you don't need to move on with steps 2 and 3. You're going to have to move on to the next applicant for this particular position. The second, so if they're not on it, you move forward to step 2, which is checking the statewide central register, often called the SCR. That's through the Office of Children and Family Services. This step is for certified OASAS providers only. So if you are not certified, you will skip this step, because in order to check the SCR, you need an OASAS certification. So once that check is submitted, you're going to proceed to step 3. However, I want to touch upon a couple things with the SCR. You do not need to wait for the result. The result from the SCR can take, my understanding is, a couple weeks, maybe even longer. So you do not have to wait for that result to move forward to step 3. However, you can opt to wait. That is up to you. Another important part of the SCR is if you find that the applicant is actually listed on the SCR, you should address this with the applicant themselves. OASAS does not get the result of the SCR, so we do not know if they're on it or not. So that's something that you need to investigate a little bit further. You can inquire to your applicant why they're on it and what the circumstances were that led to that placement. Now, there's times when perhaps the offense leads to a criminal activity. We will see that when they get fingerprinted. So, but there are times when an applicant may be placed on the SCR and that behavior didn't rise to the level of criminal activity, so we wouldn't see that part. So then after you've completed the SCR check, you move to the fingerprinting appointment. This is step 3. So the most important thing here is that you're actually scheduling it correctly, obviously. So we've provided a unique link which already has the service code entered for you. However, if you find yourself that you're just at the general site, which would be youenroll.identigo.com, we've also provided the service code. So this is an extremely important code that you need to schedule your prospective hires for fingerprinting. So please take note of that. Also, if you are being prompted for payment, you have used the wrong service code. So at that point, you need to start over. And if you're still unsure about what that service code might be, you can contact our office. The next important piece of information you need to schedule an appointment is your provider ID. If you do not know your provider ID, you need to contact field office or email our unit, which is at cbc@oasas.ny.gov. This provider ID is unique to you, so make sure that you're aware of that. And like I said, if you don't know, just reach out. Someone can help you with that. Another point about the provider ID is some people might have a 3-digit or even a 2-digit ID. Identigo.com requires 5 digits. So in that case, you would add zeros ahead of your provider ID. So if your ID is 19, for instance, you would add 000, then 19. Another important part about scheduling the appointment is to make sure you're not using the OASAS Credentialing's provider ID. If you're hiring someone, again, use your provider ID. If you're assisting someone, like a current employee, in renewing their credential or obtaining their credential, credentialing unit provides specific instructions of how to fingerprint for that. They have a provider ID of their own that needs to be used in those cases. So the CBC unit relies on that provider ID to indicate where the fingerprinting results and our determinations should be sent. So we have no way of knowing where you really want them to go, so that's why the provider ID and using the correct one is extremely important. Be sure the applicant is giving you a correct and complete address when you're scheduling their appointment with Identigo. This is the address we use to contact the applicant if we need more information. So I can't stress this enough. It needs to be correct, current as well, and complete, including apartment numbers. We send letters to applicants using the USPS certified mail process. The applicant does have to sign for the letter due to the confidential information contained in that letter. We really don't have any other mechanism of providing the letter to the applicant due to that confidential information. So once we put the letter in the mail to the address provided at identigo.com, it's the applicant's responsibility to retrieve that letter and respond to it. Other than completing the criminal background check process, the most important way to minimize the risk is do not hire an applicant if you have not received a final determination or recommendation from our unit. You can log on to the CBC system at any time to see the status of the applicant's review. If you do not find your applicant in the system at all, you need to check with the applicant to make sure they actually went to their fingerprinting appointment. And if they say they did, please reach out to our unit so we can figure out what the delay is. When you log into the system and you find that your applicant has a status of being processed, that means we're in the middle of the review and have requested information from a court, from the applicant, or both. We will complete a review when we get the information we requested within the allotted time. Otherwise, the file will be closed for failure to respond. We don't keep applications open for an indefinite period of time, so in the letter, we notify applicants very clearly of how much time they have to respond to that. We will grant extensions if the applicant reaches out to us. If you find a held in abeyance status, that means that we are waiting for a court matter to be resolved before we will issue a determination. Applicants have an opportunity to explain why we shouldn't hold the file in abeyance in an effort to move the review along. Here's some important reminders about our process. Update the employment status as soon as you hire, don't hire, or withdraw an application, or after any change in the status, such as the person's no longer employed or they're no longer volunteering. Our unit requires this information for a lot of reasons, including for subsequent arrest notices. Our unit spends a lot of time reaching out to providers to find out if the provider actually hired this person, so it's greatly appreciated if you update the system as soon as the employment status changes. If your agency has only one authorized person, please designate a second authorized person immediately. You should have two authorized persons at all times. The one authorized person can leave employment, they go on vacation, so it's critical that someone gets the information in your absence. Some arrest notices are very serious, so if one AP is not in the office to receive that information, someone else really needs to get that. Also, we are prohibited from disclosing criminal history information from outside of New York State, which includes federal crimes. So you may get a determination letter that has no criminal history information in it. At that point, you need to reach out to the applicant to find out more about that if they hadn't already disclosed that to you. Another thing we'd like to point out is that this unit processes roughly 1,000 fingerprint results per month. If we reach out to you, please respond. We only reach out for information necessary to complete our review, so a timely response moves our determination process along and it also gets you a determination quicker. And please do not assume anything. If you don't know your provider ID, if you don't know the service code, if you're not sure if you have a determination or not, please don't hesitate to reach out to our unit, mainly by email. We are very responsive to that email and it helps eliminate any further errors or results going to the wrong place. Thank you.
Again, thank you guys for joining us. I would like to run through real quick the contact information. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. You can see our contact information on the screen. You've got Rob Kent, Tricia Allen, Tom Keene, and Heather Manicus, or the Criminal Background Check Unit. Our emails are on the screen, and also if you have any general questions, you can always reach out to the legal email box, which goes directly to counsel's office at OASAS, and that's at legal@oasas.ny.gov. Please don't forget to do your Learning Thursday evaluation. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. And following this session, please take the corresponding quiz in the test portal. The testers will be directed to complete a brief survey using the SurveyMonkey link. Thank you for joining us.